Welcome back, everyone, to the deep dive. Today, we're going to try to really get into deinstitutionalization
Okay.
and look at what happened when a lot of these psychiatric hospitals closed and what kind of impact that's had, particularly on the criminal justice system.
Yeah.
We've got a ton of research here. Studies, we've got reports from groups like the APA and NAMI.
Wow.
We even have a personal story from CBS News, which I thought was really powerful to kind of put a real human face on this whole issue.
For sure.
So we're going to define what deinstitutionalization is, of course.
Right.
But we're going to look at the consequences of it, both intended and unintended,
Okay.
and some of the solutions that people are working on right now.
So it's a very complex topic.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I think is so interesting about it is that it all started from this place of good intentions.
Oh.
Like the idea was to move care for people with mental illness out of these big institutions and back into their communities.
Yeah.
So it was really about trying to create a more humane and integrated approach.
That sounds great on the surface, right? You're taking people out of these environments that could be isolating, sometimes even harmful.
Sure.
And trying to get them back into a more, quote unquote, normal life.
Exactly.
But it seems like there were some pretty big challenges in making that vision a reality.
Yeah.
So what went wrong?
Well, I think the big issue was that the communities that they were trying to reintegrate these folks into just weren't equipped to provide the support that they needed.
Okay.
So without the proper care and the resources, a lot of individuals really struggled. And some of them actually ended up in situations that led to involvement in the criminal justice system.
So instead of hospitals, it became prisons.
Yeah, unfortunately, in many cases, that's exactly what happened.
Wow.
The statistics are alarming. Like the American Psychological Association estimates that over half of the U.S. prison population has some form of mental illness.
That's a huge number.
It's a massive number, and it points to this really systemic problem.
It really does, and it makes you wonder how many people ended up in prison because they weren't getting the help they needed in the first place.
Right. It's really tragic.
It is, and there's research that supports that connection. A study by Lamb in 2001 highlighted this steady increase in the mentally ill prison population since the 1950s.
Oh, wow.
Which is the same time that deinstitutionalization was really gaining momentum.
Wow. So there's a direct correlation there.
Yeah, so we see that link pretty clearly.
Yeah.
Can you give us an example? What kind of situation leads someone with mental illness to end up in the criminal justice system?
Well, just imagine like someone struggling with a severe mental illness who doesn't have access to treatment or medication.
Right.
They might experience a crisis, right? They might exhibit behaviors that are misinterpreted.
Sure.
Or even just get caught in this cycle of poverty and homelessness that makes them even more vulnerable.
Right.
So without the right intervention and support, these situations can escalate.
Right.
And then they have these encounters with law enforcement that ultimately lead to their arrest.
So it's not that people with mental illness are more likely to commit crimes. It's just that they're more likely to be criminalized for behaviors that are really stemming from their illness.
Exactly. Their needs aren't being met by the healthcare system, so they end up in the criminal justice system instead.
Right.
And I think the story of Maryam Abdullah is a really powerful example of the human cost of this.
Yeah, I read that story. It's heartbreaking. She was incarcerated and died by suicide in prison.
Yeah.
Despite a prison psychiatrist recommending that she be placed on suicide watch.
It's awful.
It really is. And it makes you wonder, if people with mental illness are incarcerated, are they even getting adequate care then?
That's the big question, and I think the research suggests that the answer is often no.
Wow.
There's a study by Bacak and Ridgway in 2018 that looked at these health programs in both public and private prisons.
Okay.
And what they found was kind of surprising. Well, you would think that private prisons, with their for-profit model, would have more resources to dedicate to inmate care.
That makes sense, right?
You would think so.
Yeah.
But they actually often have fewer programs for substance abuse, mental health, and even HIV/AIDS.
Oh, wow.
And then public prisons often rely on private contractors, which can lead to inconsistent and often inadequate care.
So the system is failing these individuals at every turn, first by not giving them support in their communities,
Right.
and then not offering proper treatment even when they're incarcerated?
Yeah, it's a bleak picture.
It is. So where do we go from here?
Well, it's a really complicated problem, but there are some initiatives emerging that offer a glimmer of hope.
Okay.
One program that's gaining traction is NAMI's Serving Safely program.
Okay, tell me more about Serving Safely. How does it address this issue?
Well, what's interesting about it is that it focuses on giving law enforcement officers better tools to respond to people who are experiencing mental health crises.
Okay, so instead of just arresting someone, they're trained to de-escalate the situation, and they have a better understanding of what mental illness is.
Exactly. It's a much more proactive approach.
Yeah.
It aims to equip officers with the knowledge and skills to recognize the signs of a mental health crisis,
Okay.
communicate effectively, and de-escalate situations without having to resort to force.
So we're moving away from this punitive approach.
Yeah.
And moving more towards safety and support.
Exactly.
Okay, so it's a much more humane approach, recognizing that mental illness is a health issue, not just a criminal justice issue.
Right.
But is this training just for individual officers, or is there like a larger collaborative effort involved?
That's actually one of the key aspects of serving safely is this emphasis on collaboration.
Okay.
It's not just about training officers in isolation. It's about building this network of support that includes community members and mental health professionals all working together.
So it's a more comprehensive approach, making sure that people with mental illness have access to support both before and after any interaction with law enforcement.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Ideally, we can get people the help they need without them ever even entering the criminal justice system.
That's the goal.
And one of the goals is to make this program like the nationwide standard.
Yeah.
And ensure consistent training and practices across the country.
Yeah, because that consistency is really important. We need to make sure that everyone, regardless of where they live, encounters law enforcement officers who are trained to handle these situations with compassion and expertise.
Exactly.
So what kind of impact do you think a program like this could have on this larger issue of deinstitutionalization and its consequences?
I think it's a significant step towards recognizing that mental illness is a health issue, not a criminal one.
Right.
And by giving officers the right tools and knowledge, we can hopefully start redirecting people towards the care they need instead of incarceration.
Right.
But it's important to remember that this is just one piece of a very complex puzzle. There's still a lot of work to do to address the systemic issues that contribute to this problem.
So serving safely is a promising step, but it's not a cure-all solution.
Right.
We need to think more broadly than just law enforcement and think about what role communities can play in supporting people with mental illness.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
We need to create communities where people with mental illness feel supported, understood, and have access to the resources they need to thrive.
Okay.
But we'll delve deeper into that after a quick break.
Okay. Sounds good.
Creating supportive communities sounds great in theory, but what does that actually look like?
Right. You can't just shift responsibility from hospitals to prisons to police.
Right.
What are some actual things that communities can do to address this?
Well, think about like the fundamental elements of well-being, like
Yeah.
stable housing and job opportunities, access to health care,
Right.
social connections.
Yeah.
These are all so important for everyone, but particularly for people with mental illness.
So it's about creating an environment where they can thrive, not just treating the illness.
Exactly. When people have that solid foundation, they're less likely to experience those crises that might lead to involvement with the justice system.
It's about addressing the root causes and not just the symptoms.
Mm-mm.
But it feels overwhelming. Like, how can communities even begin to tackle these issues?
Yeah, it has to start with a change in perspective. Like we need to move away from the stigma and the fear that surrounds mental illness and really move towards empathy and understanding.
Because that stigma prevents people from getting help.
Absolutely. It keeps them silent and isolated.
Yeah.
And that's so damaging. We need to foster a culture where it's okay to not be okay.
I love that it's okay to not be okay.
Right.
That's a powerful message.
It really is. And it's a message that needs to be everywhere in our families, our schools, our workplaces, and our communities.
This is even bigger than mental health.
I think so.
It's about creating a better society for everyone.
I completely agree. When we strive to meet the needs of the most vulnerable among us, it benefits all of us.
Absolutely. So for our listeners who want to help, where should they start?
Start by educating yourself.
Yeah.
Learn about the issues, the challenges, the different perspectives.
Right.
There are some amazing resources out there from organizations like NAMI,
Yeah.
the American Psychological Association.
Don't just read the headlines.
Right. Go deeper. Try to understand the nuances.
Yeah.
And once you have that understanding, look for ways to get involved in your own community.
Okay.
You could volunteer at a mental health organization.
Mm-hmm.
You could advocate for policy changes.
Yeah.
You could support initiatives that promote affordable housing or job training.
Right.
There are so many ways to contribute.
And sometimes the most important thing is just listening.
Absolutely. Just being there for someone.
Yeah, offering support.
Lending an ear, a shoulder to lean on.
It's about human connection breaking down that isolation.
Exactly.
So this is a journey.
It is.
There's no quick fix.
But we can work together to build better communities.
More inclusive, more supportive. A world where everyone can thrive.
That's the goal.
I think it's possible.
I do too.
We've covered a lot today.
We have.
The history of deinstitutionalization, the impact on the criminal justice system, solutions like serving safely,
Right.
and the role of community support.
It's been a great discussion.
It really has, and we want to hear from you, our listeners.
Absolutely.
What are your thoughts on this whole issue of deinstitutionalization?
What have you seen?
Have you seen successful community-based programs
Share your thoughts with us.
on social media or our website?
We're all in this together.
Let's keep talking about it.
Yeah.
Now, before we wrap up,
Okay.
we wanted to leave you with one final thought.
Okay.
We've talked a lot about systemic change,
Hmm?
but what about the individual level?
Right.
What can each of us do
In our daily lives,
to challenge stigma and be more welcoming?
to people experiencing these challenges,
It starts with small acts of kindness,
understanding, treating everyone with respect and dignity.
regardless of their struggles.
Mental illness is part of the human experience.
It's not something to be ashamed of
Right.
or hide away.
We need to believe in recovery and resilience.
So think about how you can be an advocate.
How can you create a more compassionate world?
The answers are within each of us.
Be the change you want to see.
Powerful words.
Thank you for joining us
We'll be back next week.
with another topic.
Until then, stay curious.
And keep learning.
And remember,
It's okay to not be okay.
reach out if you need help.
There's strength in vulnerability.
Take care. So we've been talking about the human impact, in communities in the criminal justice system.
Right.
Programs like Serving Safely.
Yeah.
But there's another side to all of this that we haven't really touched on.
I think the economic side of deinstitutionalization often gets overlooked,
Right.
but it's a really important part of the story.
I remember reading about that.
Yeah, there's a study by Chow and Preeb in 2013, and they highlighted how deinstitutionalization, while it was intended to reduce costs,
Right.
actually shifted those costs to other parts of society.
So we're not funding these big hospitals anymore, but
Right.
now we're paying for incarceration.
Exactly. And all the costs that come with that.
Yeah.
And it's not just about the direct costs like housing people in prisons and jails.
Yeah.
There are all these indirect costs too, like lost productivity when people can't work,
Right.
the strain on families and communities,
Mm-hmm.
and the long-term impact of having a criminal record,
Yeah.
which makes it even harder to reintegrate into society.
Makes sense. It's like we tried to save money in one area, but created a whole bunch of expenses in other areas.
Right.
What if we had just invested more in community mental health services from the beginning?
That's a tough question.
Yeah.
It's hard to know for sure.
Right.
But I do think it's safe to say that investing in good mental health care isn't just the right thing to do ethically.
Mm-hmm.
It makes an economic sense too.
Yeah. So this is about thinking long term,
Exactly.
not just short term cost savings.
We need to see mental health care as essential for a healthy society.
Okay. But how do we make that happen?
Right.
Especially when funding for these kinds of programs is always under threat.
It's a challenge, but I think we need to really focus on the economic benefits.
Okay.
When people have support,
Right.
they can work, they contribute to their communities.
Mm-hmm.
They're less likely to end up in the justice system.
So it's not just about being compassionate. It's
Well-
about smart investments.
Exactly. It benefits everyone.
It's a win-win.
Yeah.
Well, this deep dive has been really eye-opening.
It has.
We've
man.
explored so much. The
Yeah.
history, the consequences, the struggles, and the hope.
And the solutions,
Yeah.
like serving safely.
And community support.
It's complicated.
It really is. There's no easy fix
But we need a multifaceted approach.
to really tackle this.
Systemic change, community support.
And a change in how we think about mental health.
It's an ongoing conversation.
It is. We need to keep learning, keep talking, and advocating for better solutions.
And remember,
Yeah.
it's okay to not be okay.
Reach out if you need help.
There's strength in asking for support.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into deinstitutionalization.
It was great talking about this.
We'll be back next week with another interesting topic.
Until then,
Stay curious
keep learning.
and take care.